So first of all, we already kind of answered the question of what is truth in the last segment, but I think we can talk a little bit more about that. And the question of what is truth is actually kind of simple because we're asking what's objectively true about the world. We're not asking every in and out. We're asking what's objectively true about the world. When we ask the question, what is truth, we're seeking answers through philosophy and religion. It will lead us to religion. Religion is something that is unavoidable. Religion's also done a lot of damage. The question of what is truth will lead us to a religion because it's making a claim that can't be proven by science. What you might hear in the world today is, "Oh, I only trust scientific truths," or "Only truth can only be found through science." Is something you'll hear in the world today. There's a good question you can ask back to them when someone says that. If somebody says to you, "Truth can only be found through science," your response should be, "Is that a scientific truth? Can you prove that in a laboratory?" You can't. We're seeking truth beyond science. That doesn't mean we're never going to look at science, because there's books like Lee Strobel's A Case for a Creator, which is a fantastic book when it comes to the evidence through science of a creator of the universe. That's not the only place you can find truth. Truth can be found through philosophy. It can be found through religion. Of course, we have to ask the question, which religion is true? Which religion is true? We're talking about truth. Well, the three world religions, if we want to take a look at those, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, are the three places you can go. Well, you have to look at the core tenets of the faith and say which one most accurately supports the world as we see it. Judaism is frankly just Christianity, but incomplete. You're missing Jesus, because Judaism isn't false except for the fact that it now claims that Jesus is not the Messiah. If Jesus is known to be the Messiah, then Judaism is just simply complete. And Islam, notice how Islam can't get rid of Jesus. Jesus exists in Islam, but he's not the Messiah, because every world religion has to deal with Jesus. So that leads us to think, maybe Jesus is the truth. Maybe Jesus has some tie to this truth, because we can't get rid of this guy. He has existed for all of human history. You can't get rid of him. He's always there, everywhere. There's a book called written by J. Robles called "Person of Interest" that dissects the impact Jesus made on the culture today, in the world today, not just today, but through all of human history. You can reconstruct the entire gospel accounts, or you can construct the gospel story in general from paintings from the first century or two after Christ. That's impressive. That's notable. This guy was 33 years old when he died. He was a carpenter. He was an itinerant preacher. He wandered around. He was homeless, for crying out loud. And this guy had more impact on the world than any other human being to ever live. And I think that's pretty indisputable. So when we seek truth, I think one of the first places we should look is Jesus of Nazareth. But when I thought of questions that were commonly asked, and feel free to submit questions in the comments, on Instagram, DM, there's 1,000 different ways to get a hold of me through the show or my personal social media. I love questions. Questions are what lead us closer to truth. The biggest question that I figured that we should just try to answer is a big one, all right, and it's not a simple question to answer, but I think that you can actually sum it up relatively quickly, and that is the problem of evil. Many people will say to you, and I'm saying this to people who may be young apologists, upcoming apologists, the problem of evil is not going anywhere. You're going to be confronted with the problem of evil. The question is, how do you deal with that? Well, there's a lot of different ways to deal with it. I think one of the best ones is to turn the question back on the person asking. This is a moral question. Let's make that very clear. This is a moral question. The problem of evil is asking, if God, why evil? You're accusing God of being immoral. This question does not actually provide any evidence that Jesus or God don't exist. Get that very clear. This is what they'll try to tell you. In the culture today, you'll hear a lot that evil kind of disproves God. If there is a God, why does he allow all this evil to happen? Valid question. I'll give you that. It's a valid question. But it does not disprove God. If I don't like mosquitoes, does that prove that they don't exist? Or if I benefit from gravity, does that prove that gravity does exist? No. What I want and what I gain from the world has no impact on truth. And the show, again, is what is truth. There's no impact on truth at all. So the problem of evil is a question that must be dealt with from the perspective that it is a moral question. When someone asks a moral question, you ought to go back to what C.S. Lewis said about morality. To give you a little background in case you don't know C.S. Lewis, obviously, he wrote Chronicles of Narnia, so a lot of us know C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, but he also wrote other books. C.S. Lewis was, I think, the most important Christian apologist, most influential Christian apologist of the past 200 years. And C.S. Lewis said this. He said, the reason I wasn't a Christian, I'm paraphrasing because I can't remember the exact quote. The reason I wasn't a Christian was because the universe seemed so cruel and unjust. But where did I get this idea of just and unjust? One does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea what the straight line looks like. To what was I comparing the universe when I called it just and unjust? This is how you turn the argument around. If someone's claiming that God is immoral, some people may call God a moral monster for what he did to the Canaanites in the Old Testament. Which, by the way, if you're calling God a moral monster for what he did in the Old Testament, that means you must believe the Old Testament is accurately recorded history. Catch 20. I don't know if that's the correct usage. Catch 22. That doesn't make any sense. If you're using the Old Testament to disprove God's existence, well, if the Old Testament's true, then God exists because God is a central figure in the Old Testament. If God, let's take, for example, let's say that God really did do the worst things he's accused of doing in the Old Testament. Let's say that God ordered the Israelites to murder men, women, and children, wipe out entire populations, which is up for debate how literal those scriptures need to be taken, whether the Israelites really did just wipe out populations of women and children. It's entirely possible that that's the case, but as William Lane Craig points out, let's say that that's the worst case scenario. Does that disprove that God exists? It does not. It doesn't at all. Because if I do something evil, does that prove that I don't exist? No. But more importantly than that, how can God be evil? Because where do you get this idea of good and evil without God, like C.S. Lewis said? If we need the straight line to tell us what good and evil are, then we certainly need God to tell us what good and evil are, because God is what we mean when we say the straight line. If that's the case, then we can no longer accuse God of being immoral. We can't call God unjust, because he's the very standard of justice, which means whatever he does must be just. Someone may say God should be able to do anything. And a lot of Christians, including me, I've had a problem with this. Can God make a stone so heavy he can't lift it? Can God make a square circle? Well, the answer is no. In the same way that God can't sin. God has a nature. According to what a Christian believes, God has a nature of truth, justice, perfection, power. He can't break his own rules, though, because he's the very standard of those rules. So God cannot do something evil. If God does something, it's just. And someone may accuse God of being a murderer for killing the Canaanites. God can't murder. If God created you, he can't murder you. God can take you out of this life whenever he wants. These are hard truths. These are not easy things to swallow, but it is the reality. God has an absolute right to do what he wants with his creation. But can I tell you something? According to that book, if the Bible's true, he will do whatever's best for you. We may not be able to see it. There's this thing called the butterfly effect. That says that we can't see the whole picture, but maybe somebody stepping on a butterfly today ripples forward to cause a great evangelist to rise up 50 years from now. We just don't know. So when we accuse God of being unjust, we're using a standard of God. We're using a standard from God to argue against him. There's actually a book written by Frank Turek, who I had the pleasure of getting to meet a year ago or so. It's called Stealing from God, Why Atheists Need God to Make Their Case. And the point is exactly that. Atheists will often use moral arguments to argue against God. How can you use a moral argument to argue against God if God is the standard of morality? And if God isn't the standard of morality, what is? And if it's you, if you're your own standard of morality, who says Hitler's wrong? There's a chapter in Frank Turek's other book called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, called Mother Teresa versus Hitler. We all agree that Mother Teresa lived a better life than Hitler. But how do we know that? We don't know that if there is no God. Friends, there are so many good arguments for Christianity, and we've just hit the surface. Remember, always speak the truth in love. Search the truth in love. And live out the truth in love. We're called to show unconditional divine love, as my mentor once told me. But we also are called to seek the truth. Seek the truth above all else. And I truly believe that will lead you to Jesus Christ. That's the end of our Q&A today, and that is the end of What is Truth, Episode 1 for today. I'd like to thank some of the people who have made this show possible. For one, I'd like to thank my Faith Talk co-host, Oliver Robles, for designing the amazing logo we have going for What is Truth. I'd like to thank S4M on music platforms for making the theme song for this show. Good friend of mine as well. He's also our producer over at Faith Talk. You can check out Faith Talk in our links as well, because Faith Talk is a interview style podcast we do once a month where we interview different people to have conversations about truth. This show is primarily aimed at commentary and interviews and questions and answers in regards to truth. Seek truth. Remember, above all else, to show unconditional divine love, to seek truth, and I truly believe that will lead you to Christ. God bless. Have a great day. We'll see you here next time. If you enjoyed that video, if you like what you saw, you could like, comment, or subscribe, or don't. Our God's a God of free will. But remember what the Apostle Paul said: everything's permittable to me, but not everything is beneficial to me. So just think about that before you leave this video. Would it be beneficial to you to get a weekly dose of what is truth? I don't know. That's up to you. If you enjoyed it, share it around. I'd really appreciate it. God bless.